So we've been looking at intermediality in Chinese arts, and this last panel we will kind of like branch out to look intermediality beyond China and in some kind of global context. So we have the final panel from University of Reading, Elduque, John Gibbs, and Lucy Tyler. And the title is Re-Enacting Silent Movie Prologues, Embodying Intermediality.
Thanks, Shin. Just to say, yeah, as she points out, we're going to move. This is the beyond part of today's program, or at least one of them. And one thing to say, we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. You're going to watch some quite a long chunk of some performances in a moment. We're going to set them up. We're then going to discuss what we learned from the process. But one of the ideas that comes up later in our presentation is the idea of a payoff around embodying intermediality. So bear with us, and I hope the payoff of the paper will work for you as well as the payoff that we're talking about. Right. So in this panel, we're going to screen a multi-camera recording of a rare restaging of 2 silent movie prologues, and explore the material from a range of points of view: historical, intermedial, and pedagogical. Movie prologues were a highly significant exhibition practice, and one which is difficult to recapture from today's vantage point. While the films that they accompanied may have survived, the more ephemeral performances that preceded screenings can usually only be imagined from photographs and contemporary accounts. The AHRC FAPESB funded Intermedia project was able to restage 2 prologues which had originally been performed in the marquee cinemas of Cinelândia in Rio de Janeiro in 1926. A number of the scripts from the Cinelândia prologues survive in the records of the Censor's Office, now held in the National Archives in Rio. And drawing on these, one of the wider team, one of the principal investigators indeed of the wider team, Luciana Araújo, through her work, the project was able to restage 2 prologues: the Stylised Cowboy, which accompanied screenings of Buster Keaton's Go West, and Doing It the Pirandello Way, which was written to precede a film called Beggar on Horseback, directed by James Cruze in 1925, of which only a fragment survives.
In order to revive the original intention of the prologues, the Intermedia project staged them together with the screening of the films. In Brazil, the prologues were revived at São Paulo at Museu da Imagem e do Som, the Museum of Image and Sound, by Companhia Antropofágica, which means anthropophagic team or anthropophagic company, who combined Brazilian modernist practices with those of the Teatro de Revista. Teatro de Revista is Brazil's equivalent of variety or vaudeville, but it is infused with an even stronger sense of the carnivalesque. The name of the theatre company embodies one of the key ideas of Brazilian modernism, which is cannibalism. How do Brazilian artists respond to European or North American culture? By consuming and assimilating the parts of it which are useful and parodying, desacralizing, and carnivalizing them in order to challenge colonial cultural hierarchies. Anthropophagy as a cultural practice was theorized in the 1920s by modernist artist Oswald de Andrade, and it has reemerged in different moments throughout Brazilian history, most notably in cinema and visual arts from 1960s and 70s. Here you can see images from Nelson Pereira dos Santos' How Tasty Was My Little Frenchman, and from Joaquim Pedro de Andrade's Macunaíma. 2 films that explicitly represent anthropophagy and that explore the links between anthropophagy and topics such as anti-colonialism, consumerism, and military dictatorship. In other cases, such as The Red Light Bandit, a film by Rogério Sganzerla from 1968, anthropophagy is a form of parody of foreign films, as you can see here in a comparison between the ending of the film of The Red Light Bandit on the left-hand side, and the end of Jean-Luc Godard's Pierrot Le Fou.
In the UK, the staging of the prologues was integrated into a final year module on the BA Film and Theatre at the University of Reading. 2 student ensembles were commissioned to stage 1 prologue each, and a third to create an atmospheric experience which took over the wider complex of the Minghella Studios. The student ensembles engaged a number of performance strategies that created a dialogue between the films and prologues. The process constituted an intercultural negotiation, since it involved a British contemporary interpretation of scripts from 1920s Brazil, which drew on local performance traditions while satirising European avant-garde and Hollywood cinema.
Within the context of the Intermedia project, there were a number of reasons for doing this. The project is about both the history of Brazilian cinema, but also an attempt to explore intermediality as a method for exploring film history more generally. The prologues were of interest to us as a historically significant exhibition practice, but also because of the opportunity that restaging them would present for thinking about intermedial approaches. One of the ambitions of the project was to explore the potential of intermedial methods for developing non-linear, non-hierarchical approaches to film history. Could this part of the project help develop a sense of what such an intermedial methods might be like?
The Reading students were taking a module called Ensemble Practice. This was an existing module in which students were encouraged to create ensembles and to respond to professional briefs. This time, the commissioning body would be the Intermedia project. The ensemble's work would become a public performance and part of the programming of Reading Film Theatre, one of the project's partners. We decided early on that rather than present the films and prologues in a cinema, we would use one of the theatres in the Minghella Studios, allowing for all of the aids of atmosphere to be drawn upon: lighting, sound design, space.
Before long, and drawing on inspiration both from historical exhibition practices in which cinemas would be made over, according to the theme of the film being exhibited, and from contemporary ways of embedding screening in a live performance context, such as secret cinema, our ambition grew to encompass the whole building, and especially the foyer spaces. This would draw attention to the links between historical and contemporary intermedial cinema and performance practices, and would be a central way in which we could enhance the students' understanding of the form of atmospheric prologues. Using the foyer and a theatre for the staging and screenings, rather than a cinema, would further enable the student ensembles to draw out elements from the films, deconstruct their narrative chronologies and images, add in theatrical forms, and reconstitute these elements via liveness and presence across the spaces.
What you're going to see now is the result of the students' engagement. What you're going to see now is the result of the students' engagement with the prologues in Reading, an edited version of the whole event from December 2018. It runs to about 35 minutes in length, and afterwards we're going to discuss our approach and their approach and our findings. A couple more contextual points which might be useful before the screening. Beggar on Horseback, which was called Jazz Epidemic in Brazil, is recognised as being one of the first Hollywood films to draw on European modernist cinema in its approach, as you'll appreciate when you see the surviving fragment of the film and its prologue. The writers of the prologue certainly took this dimension to heart, not least because the prologue appeared in Rio the very same week as Marionnetti, the futurist, was visiting town. So that's the kind of immediate context for that appearance of a modernist-inspired Hollywood movie. Many of you will have seen Go West, but for those who haven't, it's worth knowing that one of the key dynamics is Buster's relationship with a cow, which displaces many of the structures which more normally involve the hero's relationship with the heroine. including an unusual play with the formation of the romantic couple at the end of the film. Less said about that, the better, perhaps. Okay, so we're now going to watch the prologues. We're going to see some of the experiences in the foyer. You're going to see prologue number 1, Jazz Epidemic, or the one doing it the Pirandello Way, leading into the surviving fragment of Jazz Epidemic, and then you're going to see the prologue relating to the Buster Keaton film, and then we'll be back after that. Here goes.
So, as you've just seen, the foyer was decorated as a 1920s cinema space where students were performing a wide variety of sketches, including a milkman, a frog bride, some flappers, a train conductor, and a half-maid, half-cowboy. There was a Brazilian-themed bar, Charleston music, and the projection of some 1920s films, including Fritz Lang's Metropolis, René Clair's Entr'acte, and Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr.
Once the audience were in the theatre space, the first prologue, doing it the Pirandello Way, commenced. This prologue presents an ingenious self-reflexive scenario in which the audience are offered an anti-performance in a wry play with forms of modernism. In their staging, the students responded to the relationship they perceived between Teatro de Revista and Music Hall. They decided to hire a set of footlights to create elements of a dining music hall, which then become part of a 1920s cabaret setting, enabling them to bring an audience into the stage picture and find a way of leading the characters and ideas from the foyer prologues into the space and imagery of the first stage prologue. In the script, Iracema leaves the auditorium in tears with her husband, but in the version presented here, she lets him leave on his own and settles down at a table to watch the show.
The Stylized Cowboy engages in a playful and sardonic discourse around Hollywood, its stars, and the dynamics by which the North American film industry dominates the cultural imagination of the rest of the world. In the spirit of Teatro de Revista, elements of the ordinary order of things are turned upside down, and the prologue pokes fun at the relationship between Brazil and Hollywood, and the scurrilous figure of Manuel the Cowman. The students responded to these dynamics in different ways, recognizing a parallel between Teatro de Revista and pantomime. They created not just a theatrical solution on how to present the cow on stage, but also drew on other traditions of casting, performance, and dress from pantomime, as well as an awareness of Keaton's own roots in vaudeville. They very swiftly developed blocking for the piece, drawing on both of these traditions, and Julie, who plays Manuel the Cowman, rapidly developed a physicality in her performance style which evokes a man aspiring to present himself with the expansive masculinity of a Western hero, as well as claiming kinship with Keaton, while simultaneously offering this as a performance.
Our process began by introducing students to the films Beggar on Horseback and Go West, and undertaking a cold reading and analysis of their respective prologues, doing it the Pirandello Way and the Stylized Cowboy. In the discussion following, students were able to start to understand the interrelationships between the prologues and films. They noted, for example, how each prologue sketches out ideas, situations, and motifs that are fully developed and completed in the film. We noticed that the prologues were dissimilar to other dramatic works, that they departed from conventional Western dramaturgies, including the principles of the short play. Instead, we saw that the prologue seemed to be formally focused on constructing what we later understood to be a mode of lifting and repurposing units of action, character, dialogue, gesture, motif, and image.
In the spirit of this approach, the students became increasingly interested in what they could find in the films and draw out in their own practice. They returned to the films with the proposition of locating a number of themes, images, and gestures that we could then develop. An example of this is, in both Beggar on Horseback and Go West, The students noted that the steam train is a key image. Over a number of workshops, the ensemble working in the foyer took the concept of the train and developed a mini performance of a train conductor who would, in the foyer, blow whistles and call out at various points the train stops that the train makes in Go West. Not only a referent to both films, this train conductor became a key structuring device for the event, notifying the audience when they should enter the theatre.
Thanks, guys. Have a lovely evening.
In addition, the students noted an array of other images, motifs, and gestures in the films that they started to tease out and experiment with in order to create mini performances. In the foyer, to create mini performances in the foyer and performance strategies that enrich the prologues themselves. The process became one of setting ourselves the challenge of to what extent we could draw from the films and return with elements we could integrate into our own practice.
Go West has a moment in which plays on Keaton's reputation as the great stone face, and the motif from Broken Blossoms in which Lillian Gish tries to force a smile with her hand in an attempt to avoid the wrath of her tyrannical father battling Burroughs. The student ensemble incorporated a variant on this motif in their performance of the Stylised Cowboy, which also plays on this stone face image, in the moment where Manuel the cowman tries to avoid laughing, even while being tickled by Enriqueta. The details of performance here extend the written prologue's own design by creating another of these motifs which traverse the evening.
Increasingly, we realised what a central figure Keaton is. He unites silent film comedy with his roots as a vaudeville performer, but also connects to 1920s modernism and its reflection in Beggar on Horseback and Doing It the Pirandello Way. Darley and Lorca wrote a play featuring Keaton, and he was notably the favourite of the surrealist group. His standing as an unself-conscious modernist was recognised from Breton to Beckett to Robert Benayoun, whose important book, The Look of Buster Keaton, traces the connections he sees between Keaton's films and a range of modernist art practice, a work we encourage the students to engage with. Sherlock Jr., which was one of a number of 1920s films playing in the foyer, famously includes the passage where Keaton's dreaming self steps into the cinema frame and is confronted by a battery of cross-cutting, more disorienting than any surrealist outing to the cinema.
Thinking about Buster Keaton's own dramaturgy became key to evolving our practice. Initially, we had understood the prologues to be engaged in a linear process of drawing out elements from the films and reconstituting them in the theatrical space. This is obvious. Buster Keaton appears in both prologue and film, for example. But the interrelationship between prologue and film, we noticed, could be better articulated by paying attention to Keaton's practice and how his own performance operates. Keaton's own performance strategies, including gender fluidity, multiplication of the body, and Matryoshka-like reflexivity, connects with the avant-garde. Compared with other films such as Sherlock Jr. or Seven Chances, Go West may seem a bit more restrained in its modernism and formal play, but it nonetheless creates a number of motifs which the surrealists no doubt appreciated, such as Keaton in a red devil costume being chased through Los Angeles by dozens of cows. In our own practice, then, revealing Keaton's relationship with the avant-garde became a key way to connect the prologues and the films.
Moreover, focusing on Keaton seemed to further our understanding of how to approach the prologues. Keaton's own performances can be understood as a practice engaged with a special kind of payoff, not simply a conventional narrative gag structure of setting up a comic feature to be returned to later, but a larger unifying principle where Keaton negotiates on screen a series of characters and objects that, via his own physicality and gesture, are brought together. In short, the payoff is the way in which Keaton moves through an on-screen world, negotiating social relations, locations and objects that are then brought together to produce Keaton's own formal structures. The prologues, we started to understand, worked similarly to Keaton's payoff. They did not simply lift and reproduce elements from the films in a linear way. They seemed to operate instead according to the payoff, in which bodies, objects, and scenes lose their fixedness and technical reproducibility. Keaton's payoff, we felt, became a way to understand the prologue's unique form. It is the diffuse and non-hierarchical way in which images and elements are drawn boldly from the film and reconstituted abstractly, rather than organised narratologically in theatrical space.
What we needed was a term that spoke to Keaton's dramaturgy and our own understanding of how the prologues operated, and furthermore, a term that would help us to articulate our own performance practices. Eventually, we articulated this in the phrase embodied intermediality. Embodied intermediality, as we conceive it, is an approach that connects film and theatrical practices via the prologues while deconstructing narrative logic and chronology. It is a term that helps to negotiate the intermedial qualities of this dramaturgy, but also recognises that bodies and physicality are central means for making these connections.
With the term embodied intermediality, then, we could start to see how students' physical performances were the central tool for extracting filmic elements and reconstituting them. For example, in doing it the Pirandello Way, students loved the Rio de Janeiro society wife, obsessed with the modernist poet Marinetti, who was visiting Brazil at the time of the screening. The wife, Erasima, has become a modernist poet herself and recites a poem on stage of her choosing. Understanding embodied intermediality allowed the students to feel that they could extract this poem. As a result, they developed a performance in which it was delivered by two other performers in the foyer prior to its appearance in the prologue.
Similarly, students responded to the Frogs and Bride from Beggar and Horseback. They decided to condense both into a single image of a frog bride played by a male-identifying performer who was let loose in the foyer to ask audiences questions about the whereabouts of his husband. The students were initially hesitant about appropriating and condensing images, worrying that audiences would not understand the presentation of frog brides in the foyer, for example. This led to conversations about how embodied intermediality, however, was a unifying, curating principle, that the audience would experience a payoff where the same images would play out over the evening, commencing in the foyer, moving into the prologues and then again appearing in the film. By reminding the students of their own delight in Keaton's payoffs, we were able to assure them that experimenting with chronologies and the positioning of images might have a similar effect on our audiences. Teresa, a member of the audience, reflects on a number of these elements in her experience of the evening.
Reading Film Theatre and saw it advertised there, and I've been to the Minghella Theatre before seeing other things, but no, I haven't heard of that before at all.
And what do you think?
Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. I just quite like the sort of the crossover really, and the sort of atmosphere, and yeah, it was good. It was good fun. Good fun. Yeah, it was really nice. Sort of, there was a few little links in, like with the Buster Keaton character with the smile bit, and it just kind of almost made me sort of chuckle even more. So having always been sort of a little bit pre-prepared with that bit, yeah, no, it worked really well. It was good.
You can experiment away, but you're not going to make me laugh because I'm exactly like Buster Keaton. Exactly. Well, go on then, be my guest. Experiment, but you're not going to make me laugh. You're not going to make me laugh. No, I'm not going to laugh, not even if you force me to. I know.
Oh, yes. Yes, please. I came on my own, so it was really nice to sort of have the sort of interaction with people, and even just to watch the Buster Keaton out there and sort of chat a little bit with people afterwards. So sort of seeing it in the round really, isn't it? Not just a film, but as a whole sort of event, so it's nice.
Is there anything else that you would like to add or to...
Can we have more of it, please? Can we have more?
Seeing the event play in front of audiences helped us to understand more about what an embodied intermediality might involve. By hearing from Teresa and other spectators about the effect of the payoff, we can understand embodied intermediality to be not just a dramaturgical structure and performance strategy, but also a curation practice in which the audience are engaged and experience in particular ways. Embodied intermediality not only operates via the mise-en-scene's bodies and objects, but also in the audience's own experiences, in their process of decoding and their negotiation of the evening's events. Their active engagement with interpreting the elements presented across the evening is the final critical stage of embodied intermediality in performance, or perhaps so we thought until we came here today. Where was I up to? Instead, embodied intermediality, as it operates in the prologues and in their curating, should be considered to be a continuous shifting between both media, happening finally in the bodies and minds of the spectators themselves. And it's been really useful, I think, for us to be here today. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us, because it really supports our contextualization and an expansion of vocabularies around this practice that we did with the students. John mentioned at the beginning that we did this with the students in 2018, and obviously a lot has happened since then. The global pandemic shifted students' behaviours and practices as much as our own, and in terms of embodied intermediality, we were wondering how much has changed in relation to that term since we originally did this. And furthermore, we were thinking of other things that have happened to young people, and indeed ourselves, since then as well, and the advent of further social media platforms and the further kind of use of them by young people. For example, Twitter, where students conduct their own autonomous... TikTok, did I say Twitter?
You did,
yeah. TikTok, where students and young people, and maybe some of us as well, engage in kind of autonomous iterations of embodied intermediality, such as what we've seen today, but probably likely with less modernist allusion.
Well, I gather Buster Keaton is massive on social media these days, because his little gags, work quite well on TikTok or on Instagram, in sort of tiny snippets. So I was watching a video essay about Buster Keaton's rise in recent social media forms. But again, perhaps not from the modernist point of view. Anyway, that's sort of us grinding to a halt, isn't it, Lucy?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for because that's I can't believe it's 2018, and I can't believe that's actually before the pandemic, because a lot of things happened. Yeah, so I was wondering, does anyone have any questions that want to ask the panel?
Well, as usual, I've got questions. So, are there have you got any more evidence about prologues being put on in any other places and times? And when are you going to do them? And I can think of places that you might do them, if you see what I mean. So.
It's a good question. I mean, they were quite a big practice in different countries. They were big in the States. They happened in London as well. So there's a good account of when Broken Blossoms was shown in London. They took over the whole theatre and had incense, and all the ushers and usherettes were dressed up in probably deeply racist costumes and other things like that. So yeah, it was a big thing. And interestingly, in Brazil, one of the reasons that the two that we restaged were the quite easy ones to do, in the sense that A, we had the scripts, and B, they were satirical, quite easy to produce, whereas some of the prologues were really spectacular. And so they did the Phantom of the Opera, and they had an entire orchestral reconstruction, and they played part of Gounod's Faust, and then and this was spectacular, but ruinously expensive.
Yeah.
So as a practice, it was quite short-lived there. In America, if you've ever seen the James Cagney film Footlight Parade, that's all about movie prologues, and his character, whose name momentarily escapes me, but he realises that if you can detach if you can make it less specific to the film, obviously the fun of this is it's specific to the film, but after a while, because of this question of expense, they realised that if you had sort of slightly more generic prologues, or prologues that you could show in front of a range of different films, you could mass produce them or send them on tour. And there were a brother and sister team called Fanchen and Marco, who were particularly successful in sort of having companies of performers who would go around particular Western United States cinema chains delivering prologues. But yeah, they were a bit more like a song and dance number, which might not be necessarily connected to what you were going to see at all. It just made it a more, well, certainly an intermedial experience, but it made it more of an evening. And so that answers your first part of your question. Whether we're going to do any more, I'm not sure. We'll have to get another grant from the HRC. But yeah, it was a really fun experience, and yeah, the versions by Companhia Antropofágica were really striking as well, weren't they? They were great fun.
Yeah, those were more professional and on a public theatre that attracted lots of.
They're a very impressive company, aren't they? So, but we think our students did a pretty good job too. So.
Yeah, and as a pedagogical experience, I think it was very valuable. Watching again now after some years, I was thinking about that exactly. So it was a pedagogical project in which the students engaged both in Brazilian culture and in vaudeville culture, created something. Yeah. And they worked like professionally as accepting an assignment, which was do these prologues, restage these prologues. So I think it was a very good for them.
I mean, the other point of reference, which we did mention briefly, is that certainly pre-pandemic, and it did get a bit slowed down by the pandemic, but things like Secret Cinema, where you go to somewhere in East London and they've recreated Hill Valley, and you spend the whole evening experiencing 1950s fictional town before you then watch the film. That's clearly a kind of related practice in a way, isn't it?
Just really think about it. Does it have to only be silent cinema? I know that's.
No, well, Secret Cinema.
I completely love silent cinema.
Yeah.
And it fits really well with it, but I just think that it would look really good with a whole lot of other films too.
Perfectly true. Well, maybe we should get on to Secret Cinema and give them some scripts to some movie prologues.
I was just going to ask you about that Secret Cinema, but as you were saying, as they found in the past, the Secret Cinema, for the audience, the ticket prices are very high, and it's obviously, as in the Back to the Future one, it's very specific to that particular one. So as a business model, as you were saying, the more generic ones that could be multi-purposed might be possibly, in this day and age, slightly better business plan in attracting funding, because it's not so specific to one particular one, which may have a very short run. you could spin it out a bit more, which might generate bigger revenues, which might attract the backing in the first place.
Yeah, maybe it's a way of getting people back into cinemas now. I mean, of course, the thing that's different about, you're right about if we were doing this with new releases, I guess what Secret Cinema do is they take films that people already really love and have a massive following, so they know that if they, and you know, they started quite small, didn't they? And they got bigger and bigger, and now they say, okay, well, pre-pandemic anyway, we can invest that amount of money in creating a town square from, you know, which itself was already fictional, but, you know, recreating that. So I guess that works. But yes, you're right, maybe that's what we need, a new way to get people back into cinemas post-pandemic, because they clearly haven't recovered their audiences, have they?
I think you could put them into theatres as well.
Yeah, well, perhaps you could. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. It'd be an interesting research project, wouldn't it, to see what kind of further sort of scripts we could find into the past. But also, yeah, you're right. We could commission some new ones.
So I'm guessing, what kind of challenge did you encounter during the preparation with the students? Because I know that it's kind of implanted in one of the theatre modules. So how was that different from other regular ensemble that you probably did before? Was the intermedial or embodied mediality providing kind of challenge? Were students putting off by the silent film? Because some students, I don't know, I encountered that they didn't like silent film very much. So what was the process? What were the challenges?
The challenges were that it was a much larger scale project than we would ordinarily do on a module. So that was one challenge, and another challenge was rapidly creating a literacy around modernist forms and silent cinema and the embodied intermediality that we kind of hope to inspire. And another challenge was what we mentioned in the paper as well, about students' real genuine concern about an audience's literacy and reception of the work, and the dislocation of images and their kind of fragmented positioning. They had real concerns about what an audience would how an audience would read that, which is something that students, I think, always feel about alternative or radical kind of forms of presentation in performance.
Okay, maybe at the back, and then we.
Yes, so just a kind of theoretical question, and it kind of relates to the way in which in universities we kind of deconstruct film and performance and narrate that deconstruction. So perhaps you can explain what's the thinking behind having a script prepared, deconstructing film and performance, and it being read out about film or performance. Because for me, at least as an observer, as an audience member, it comes across as kind of a form of dualism, whereby we're having to watch and understand something in a certain form, and then hear it being deconstructed in some radically different form. And I can't sort of get my head around why people have, in academia, perform script writing and then read out the script about a performance where no such script is visible.
Do you mean our analysis this evening?
It's not just yours. I mean, it's kind of
a general thing.
In academia, in film, sort of deconstruction and the narrative of theatre and performance now. It seems to be kind of typical across the board. And I just wonder what's the psychology behind that.
Well, at least we did. At least our students did give you a performance of the script.
That's
as
right.
It were.
So what I'm asking is, when the students do the performance, they do it without the script.
Yeah.
When we see the film and the visuals in the theatre, it's without the script.
Yeah.
But then when academics describe it, they describe it having written it in a kind of academic form and then read out the academic form. So what's the thinking behind
it? It used to really annoy me. I know exactly what you mean. It used to annoy me, and it takes you a while to get your head around this thing called performance analysis or film analysis. And I used to go to conferences and think that all the time. Why are you telling me something that I've just seen in another form?
No. So it's fine to tell it. What I can't get my head round is that it's told in a way which is out of sync with what's being described. So if, like I'm speaking to you now, if I was reading out a script of what I'm saying to you right now, but not saying it to you, but reading it out to you, I could do that perfectly well, no problem, and you could listen perfectly well, but it would be out of sync with the kind of conversation we're having.
Yeah.
And in the same way, when in academia we're kind of encouraging students to write a script about what they're deconstructing and then reading it out, it performs a kind of dual coding, which I can't understand what the psychology behind that
I
is.
mean, they were assessed on their performance rather than papers they'd written about the performance, so at least their output for their academic presentation was what you've just seen. Alicia?
No,
Is that following on point?
Please finish before.
Yeah, no, that's all I had to say, really.
Uh,
I mean, the other interesting thing is we'd quite like to make a sort of video essay version of this, and we tried recording these script parts, and it sounded really clunky and dull. So and when we were originally writing the paper, we had a very lively conversation in the pub, which we recorded, but not in very great conditions. But we're going to have another go at making a video essay of this material, but using a binaural microphone to make it an embodied experience for our listeners to this video essay. But equally, we've agreed that as a result of today and hearing all about different intermedial forms, and then also in particular revisiting this material, we're going to have a conversational approach to discussing some of these same ideas rather than something that's scripted, as you would put it.
Excuse me.
Are you adding on, or is it a question? Sorry, okay. Yeah.
So what I wanted to add as a parallel conversation to that one is that those scripts of the prologue, they were preserved because they needed to be submitted to censorship before being staged. Obviously the impulse of these artists who performed the prologues was very much to improvise in front of the public. So they had kind of notes of what they would be doing, and there was huge amounts of improvisation. But because of the strict censorship of the time, they required the writers of the prologue to submit them to censorship, and that's how they were preserved, because then there was the written form of those prologues. So it's just an anecdote to complement the conversation about writing, because even those prologues were not originally meant to be formally written plays to be performed in that kind of way. So that's just an information.
And there were some very interesting, we won't go into all the details of it, I think, but there were some very interesting choices to be made. We worked with a translator to take it from Portuguese into English. And then there were two issues, a number of issues, some of which we won't go through. But there were some very interesting, highly specific bits. So obviously we had to tell you that Marinetti was in Rio that week, so you could understand why Marinetti kept coming up. And but, there were references to the Central Power Company, and so there's some very, very specific to that moment in 1920s Rio that audience would have got that didn't translate very well. But we did try to keep as much material in as possible. And there were a couple of other things that we had to negotiate in other ways whilst keeping true to the intention of the original, I think.
Even the cow thing relating to women,
that
was a bit detrimental to women, so it had to be toned down.
Yeah, we did, there were other things.
Yeah, and I think the original, the Brazilian original was like quite racist, I think, the second one.
Well, there was one element that was quite racist that we then...
In the Stylised Cowboy, and we removed.
Yeah.
I think that was... oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was thinking about this idea of embodied intermediality that you spoke about, and I'm thinking about the fact that you recorded this. So once you had the archival and the script, and then the fragment, then you had that performance in the event as such, and the students kind of mediating it further, but then you have also what you have as a payoff, as a kind of result. You still have another layer of embodied intermediality, which is this, what you presented, which is the film. And I think I wonder how you kind of, if you kind of look into that in terms of theorization, because obviously for archival purposes, as discussed, that you need to have this kind of filmic element, But then in light of what happened with COVID, you know, where even more like the national, you know, NTV Live home has become a thing, you know, where every performance, you know, is being recorded and presented, you know, in the cinema. Seems to be also the theatre become more intermedial because of, you know, COVID, because, you know, to keep the theatre alive, people had to move, you know, to intermedial, you know, to use intermedial tools at their disposals. You know, a lot of theatres actually made available, you know, their live, you know, their recorded live performances. Also, we had to teach theatre drama intermittently through, you know, through Zoom. It was in it for a year plus. So I wonder, in post-COVID, how you can theorize that, since you have something which is the product which is embodied intermediality to some extent.
That's a really good question. It made me think that there was actually intermedial problems, because when we did it, there was a glitch with the film and the subtitles didn't come on Go West, did they? So we had these kind of filmic problems, but also we had the problems that you face with making live theatre. So the water at the university went off, and we had all of these guests from Brazil who were coming over, and we couldn't perform because we were all sent home. So there was these kind of interesting.
We did restage it the following week.
We did restage, yeah, we did it the following day, didn't we?
No, the one day after.
So all of these kind of these kind of issues that affect theatre and film wrapped up in the same event, which was interesting. How to theorise it now?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could theorise it, but it's a very good question. And of course, yes, it is a shame to have to, rather than actually be able to come and see the live prologues yourself. The whole point of the live prologues is that they're live prologues. But on the other hand, we thought it was worth filming because these things are so, you know, we think they've never been staged in their entirety like that before, have they? Some fragments of them been staged before. So it is a pretty unique way of trying to capture something of the experience, the historical experience. So, but yes, you're right. I mean, it's very interesting to come back to it now after all those years of Zoom teaching and as you say, different kinds of theatrical performance. I mean, I suppose there was already, I think, people like Katie Mitchell doing all kinds of things with screens and refilming on stage. But of course, that you're right. That's all been amplified, I think, since then, and it's so much part of our. So yeah, there's a good question to think through further there, certainly.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think we've come to.
Wow, okay.
Everybody must be exhausted. It was a wonderful panel, but I think every single one of us wants to see the rest of the lights that is outside. Have some drinks and go for dinner. So I have to thank you all very much, those who resisted up until now and those who came and had to leave a little bit earlier. It was a formidable audience and you gave us so much inspiration, and the panels were so wonderful too, and I learned huge amounts today and yesterday. Thank you all very much indeed, and we will keep you posted on when we post the recording of this event online. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.